Nathaniel Nate Archer stood silently by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of his office on the 50th floor, his sharp suit reflecting the soft glow of the San Francisco morning. Below him, the city bustled to life, the iconic cable cars trundling along steep streets, joggers navigating winding trails near the Golden Gate Bridge, and the bay shimmering with morning light. The view was spectacular, a daily reminder of the empire he had built. Yet, in this moment, it felt hollow. At just 37 years old, Nate had achieved more than most could dream of. He was the CEO of Archer and Company, an architectural firm renowned for its cutting-edge designs. His name was etched into the city's skyline, figuratively and literally. His accomplishments were celebrated at every gala and industry event, and his engagement to Tori Ellis, one of the top interior designers in the country, was the perfect symbol of his curated life. Yet something was missing, something he hadn't been able to define until now. Nate's thoughts were interrupted by the gentle chime of the intercom on his sleek glass desk. "Mr. Archer, your 9 a.m. meeting with the development team is ready," Maya Lopez, his assistant, informed him in her usual efficient tone. "Push it back 15 minutes, Maya," Nate replied, his voice steady but distant. He didn't move from the window, his gaze still fixed on the sprawling city below. "Yes, sir. Anything else?" Maya's hesitation was subtle, but Nate caught it. "Actually," he said, turning back toward his desk, "I need you to make an addition to the wedding guest list. Add Celine Hart." There was a pause, almost imperceptible, before Maya responded. "Of course, Mr. Archer. Should I notify Ms. Ellis?" Nate hesitated, running a hand through his neatly styled dark hair. "No, that won't be necessary. I'll take care of it." As the intercom went silent, Nate sank into his leather chair, the weight of his decision pressing on him. Celine Hart. Her name carried memories of a life he had left behind, a life he had convinced himself wasn't part of his future. Yet here he was, unable to resist the pull of the past. It had been 10 years since he had last seen her. Celine, with her fiery determination and gentle laugh, had been his anchor during his college years. She had believed in his dreams, even when they seemed impossible. But as his ambitions grew, so did the distance between them. Celine wanted a life filled with love, art, and simplicity, while Nate chased skyscrapers, awards, and the promise of more. In the end, their paths diverged, and he had buried those memories beneath layers of blueprints and contracts. But now, as his wedding to Tori approached, Nate found himself looking back, questioning the choices that had brought him to this moment. Adding Celine to the guest list felt impulsive, but it was something he couldn't explain even to himself. Was it closure, curiosity, or something deeper he wasn't ready to confront? The city stretched endlessly outside his window, but Nate's thoughts lingered on a modest art studio on the other side of town, a place he hadn't been to in a decade, but still remembered vividly. The morning sunlight shifted as clouds drifted over the city, casting fleeting shadows on Nate's desk. He leaned back, staring at the meticulously crafted blueprints spread before him. Their precision, their flawless design, everything he once prided himself on now seemed mechanical, void of the passion he once had. His thoughts circled back to the name he had just uttered. Celine Hart. Nate's mind replayed the last time they had spoken, a decade ago. It was in Boston, during a rain-soaked evening in their cramped apartment, where he had been hunched over a makeshift drafting table. She had begged him to take a break, to talk, to dream of something more than buildings and deadlines. But he had brushed her off, dismissing her concerns as distractions. Her parting words, tinged with both love and sorrow, still haunted him. I hope you find what you're looking for, Nate. But I can't follow you into a life where there's no room for us." He shook the memory away and rose abruptly, striding across the room to the bookshelf that held his accolades, plaques, awards, and framed articles showcasing his architectural triumphs. His fingers brushed over one of the earliest awards he had ever received, a design contest he had entered with Celine's encouragement. She had been his biggest cheerleader back then, celebrating his victories more fiercely than he had. "Nate?" Maya's voice broke through his reverie. She stood at the doorway, holding a digital tablet. Her sharp, intuitive gaze betrayed a hint of curiosity, though she remained professional as ever. "I've added Celine Hart to the guest list. Is there anything specific you'd like me to arrange for her?" He hesitated, considering the question. "Number just make sure she gets the invitation." Maya nodded but didn't leave immediately. "Sir, if I may—" She hesitated, something uncharacteristic for her. "I've worked with you for years, and this is the first time I've seen you unsure. Is there something about this guest I should know?" Nate met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say she's part of a life I thought I had left behind." Maya tilted her head slightly, as though weighing whether to press further, but then nodded. "Understood. If there's anything else you need, let me know." As she exited, Nate returned to the window, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. He barely recognized himself, not in the physical sense, but in the way the polished exterior no longer matched the restless uncertainty stirring within. Adding Celine's name to the guest list wasn't just about the wedding, it was about reopening a chapter he had closed too abruptly. His phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting his thoughts. Tori's name flashed on the screen. Swiping to answer, he forced a neutral tone. "Tori, hi." "Hi, love," she replied, her voice bright and cheery. "I just finalized the floral arrangements for the ceremony. Peonies and gardenias, just like we talked about. You're going to love them." "That sounds great," Nate replied automatically, though his mind was elsewhere. "And the guest list," Tori continued. "I am sending it to the printer today for the place cards. You've double-checked everything, right?" Nate hesitated. "Yeah, it's all set," he lied, his chest tightening slightly. He wasn't ready to explain the addition of Celine Hart or what her presence might mean. As the call ended, Nate found himself gazing out at the city once more. The skyline, a testament to his accomplishments, suddenly felt distant. For all his success, he realized he had spent the last 10 years constructing walls, not just buildings, but barriers that kept the most important parts of his life at bay. The soft hum of his phone's notification pulled him back to reality. It was a calendar alert. Dinner with Tori's parents, 7 p.m. Another obligation, another performance. But somewhere across the city, in a studio filled with sunlight and paint-splattered canvases, was a life he had turned away from. A life he wasn't sure he could face again. As he adjusted his tie and prepared to leave the office, one question lingered in his mind. What will she think when she sees me again? The midday sun filtered through the large arched windows of Celine Hart's art studio, casting streaks of light across the colourful chaos within. Paintbrushes, half-finished canvases, and small jars of mixed hues cluttered every surface, a testament to the creative whirlwind that fueled her livelihood. But today, the usual hum of inspiration was absent. Instead, Celine sat frozen on a worn wooden stool, the wedding invitation from Nathaniel Archer clutched in her trembling hands. She had read it 3 times, each word striking her like a distant echo of a life she thought she had left behind. Nate's name, printed in elegant cursive alongside that of Tori Ellis, was a stark reminder of a chapter she had buried deep. Why now? She wondered. After all these years of silence, of unanswered messages and unspoken truths, Why had he decided to include her? "Mom?" Arya's voice pulled her from her thoughts. The little girl stood in the doorway of the studio, her dark brown hair tied in a messy ponytail. Her bright blue eyes, so eerily reminiscent of Nate's, glittered with curiosity as she held a small paper butterfly she had crafted. "Look what I made!" Celine forced a smile, taking the paper butterfly from Arya's outstretched hands. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You did a great job." Arya beamed, her joy momentarily dispelling the storm cloud of Celine's thoughts. "Can I hang it on the window?" "Of course," Celine said softly. She watched as Arya darted to the nearest window, her tiny hands pressing the butterfly against the glass. For a moment, Celine allowed herself to admire her daughter's innocence, the way she could find wonder in the simplest things. It was a stark contrast to the turmoil roiling inside her. "Who's getting married?" Arya asked suddenly, her voice light but curious. She had spotted the invitation still clutched in Celine's hand. Celine hesitated, carefully choosing her words. "An old friend of mine," she replied, her tone even. "Someone I used to know a long time ago." "Are we going?" Arya's excitement bubbled up immediately, her blue eyes widening. "I love weddings. Are there going to be flowers and cake?" Celine opened her mouth to respond, but faltered. What could she say? That the groom was Arya's father, a man she had tried and failed to reach so many times, a man who had chosen ambition over their life together. The sound of a knock on the front door saved her from answering. "Hang tight, Arya," Celine murmured, rising from her stool and smoothing her paint-streaked apron. She crossed the studio, her bare feet padding softly against the hardwood floor, and opened the door to find Jenna Morgan, her best friend and confidant, standing with a coffee in one hand and a mischievous grin on her face. "Didn't expect to find you hiding out here," Jenna said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her sharp green eyes immediately honed in on the invitation still in Celine's hand. "Ah, so you got it." Celine sighed and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment. "Yes, I got it. And no, I haven't decided what to do." Jenna raised an eyebrow. "What's there to decide? You go. You get some closure. You show Nate Archer exactly what he missed out on." "It's not that simple, Jenna," Celine replied, her voice heavy. She glanced toward Arya, who was now humming to herself as she decorated the window with her paper butterfly. "It's not just about me anymore." Jenna's expression softened, and she followed Celine's gaze. "You're worried about Arya." "Of course I am," Celine said, crossing her arms. "What if this stirs up questions I'm not ready to answer? What if seeing him again changes everything for her?" Jenna set her coffee down on a cluttered table and folded her arms, her sharp features softening. "Look, I get it. You've built a good life here. You've done an amazing job raising Arya on your own, and you've shielded her from all the complicated mess that is Nate Archer. But maybe, just maybe, this is the chance for you to get some answers. And maybe it's a chance for Arya, too." Celine let out a sigh, her shoulders slumping. Jenna's words struck a chord she wasn't ready to acknowledge. "What if it's a mistake?" she whispered, barely audible. "What if I walk into that wedding, and all I feel is regret?" Jenna stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Celine's arm. "Or what if you walk in and realize you've already won? Look at you, Celine. You're strong, independent, and talented. You didn't let him break you, but you deserve closure. Not just for yourself, but for Arya. If nothing else, she has the right to meet her father." Celine's gaze drifted back to her daughter, who was now chattering happily to herself as she continued decorating the window. A pang of guilt twisted in her chest. She had spent years trying to protect Arya from the truth about Nate, not out of spite but out of fear. Fear that Nate wouldn't care, or worse, that he would care just enough to disrupt the stable life they had built. I don't even know if he'll want to see her, Celine said, her voice thick with uncertainty. What if he's moved so far beyond us that this doesn't mean anything to him? Then you'll know, Jenna replied firmly. You'll know where he stands, and you can finally close that door for good. But you won't get there by staying here and wondering. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of a passing car outside. Celine hated how Jenna's words resonated with her, pushing her toward a decision she wasn't ready to make. But deep down, she knew her friend was right. There was no moving forward without confronting the past. "Mum?" Aria's voice cut through the quiet. She had wandered over, her head tilted as she studied Celine's face. "You look sad." Celine knelt, brushing a strand of hair from Aria's face. "I'm not sad, sweetheart," she said gently. "I'm just thinking about something important." "About the wedding?" Aria asked, her tone curious but kind. "Yes," Celine admitted, glancing at Jenna, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. "About the wedding, and about someone very special who will be there." "Are they special to you?" Aria asked innocently. Celine hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on her. Finally, she smiled softly and said, "They were once, and they might be special to you too." Aria's eyes widened with excitement. "Can we go then? I want to see the flowers and the dresses and meet all the people." Celine felt her resolve harden. If she was going to do this, it would be for Aria, to give her daughter the chance to meet her father, to understand where she came from, and maybe, just maybe, to find a sense of closure for herself. "All right," Celine said, her voice steady. "We'll go." Jenna clapped her hands together triumphantly. "That's my girl. And don't worry, I'll help you find something stunning to wear. Nate Archer won't know what hit him." Celine rolled her eyes, but couldn't suppress a small smile. Jenna's relentless confidence had always been a source of strength for her, even in the most uncertain times. As the afternoon light shifted in the studio, Celine stood and folded the invitation carefully, setting it on the table. Her decision was made, but the road ahead felt anything but clear. What would Nate say when he saw Aria? What would Aria think when she met him? The questions swirled in her mind as she turned back to her daughter, who was now happily drawing flowers on a scrap of paper. For now, Celine would focus on the present. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but wonder, would confronting the past bring the closure she needed, or reopen wounds she had spent years trying to heal? The ballroom at the Marina Grand Hotel was a vision of elegance. Warm, golden light from crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a soft glow, illuminating the polished marble floors and towering floral arrangements that lined the walls. Guests dressed in their finest mingled near the bar, their laughter and conversation creating a hum of energy that filled the space. For most, it was an evening of celebration and luxury. For Nathaniel Archer, it was a ticking clock. Nate stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of sparkling water in his hand. Outside, the city lights sparkled against the dark water of the bay, but his thoughts were far from the dazzling view. He adjusted his cufflinks for the third time, a nervous habit he couldn't seem to shake tonight. Every time the grand doors opened to admit another wave of guests, his heart jumped. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, or dreading more. Seeing Celine again after all these years, or meeting the person she was bringing with her. Looking for someone. Tori Ellis's voice was light and teasing as she approached, her champagne flute catching the light. She wore a deep emerald gown that shimmered as she moved, her smile as radiant as always. To anyone else, she looked every bit the confident, perfect bride-to-be. Nate forced a smile, shaking his head. "Just keeping an eye on the guest list. You know how I like things running smoothly." Tori arched a perfectly shaped brow, stepping closer to loop her arm through his. "Relax, Nate. Everything's perfect. Even you can't find fault with it." He nodded, offering her a faint smile, but his mind remained elsewhere. The thought of Celine walking through those doors, of confronting the years of silence and the questions he had been too afraid to ask, made his chest tighten. He sipped his water, hoping it would steady him. The doors opened again, and this time his breath caught. It was her. Celine stepped into the room, her presence commanding attention without effort. She wore a sleek, floor-length black dress that highlighted her graceful figure, her auburn hair cascading over one shoulder in soft waves. But it wasn't just her elegance that turned heads. It was the little girl holding her hand. Aria, in a pale blue dress with a matching ribbon in her hair, looked around the grand room with wide, curious eyes. The resemblance to Nate was undeniable. Her striking blue eyes, her confident stance despite her youth. It was as though a mirror reflecting his younger self had walked into the room. For a moment the hum of the room seemed to fade for Nate. He felt rooted to the spot, the glass in his hand forgotten as his gaze locked onto Celine and the girl beside her. His daughter. The word echoed in his mind, carrying both wonder and weight. Tori noticed his reaction immediately. Her smile faltered as she followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing when they landed on Celine and Aria. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity and the faintest edge of suspicion. Nate struggled to find his voice, the storm of emotions swirling inside him, rendering him momentarily speechless. "That's—" he began. But before he could finish, Celine's eyes met his across the room. Celine's gaze held Nate's for a long, charged moment. Her expression was calm, but her eyes betrayed the mix of emotions swirling beneath the surface: resolve, vulnerability, and a quiet challenge. With a gentle nudge, she urged Aria forward, and together they began making their way across the room. Each step felt like a ripple cutting through the sea of mingling guests, their presence impossible to ignore. Nate's pulse quickened as they drew closer. The hum of conversation around him seemed distant, drowned out by the pounding of his own heart. When they stopped a few feet away, he noticed the slight lift of Celine's chin, a silent declaration that she wouldn't be the one to falter first. "Hello, Nate," she said, her voice smooth but tinged with an undercurrent of tension. Her eyes briefly flicked to Tori, who was now standing rigidly at Nate's side, her fingers still looped around his arm. "Celine," Nate managed, his voice low and unsteady. His gaze dropped to Aria, who was studying him with unabashed curiosity. She clutched a small, stuffed animal in one hand, her other still resting in her mother's. "And this is—" Tori's voice cut through the moment, like a shard of ice. Her polite smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she gestured toward Aria, the sharpness in her tone impossible to miss. Celine's lips curved into a faint, composed smile. "This is Aria," she said evenly, glancing at Nate before continuing. "My daughter." The words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Nate felt the ground beneath him shift, as though the world had tilted off its axis. He had known. Deep down, he had known. But hearing it aloud brought a rush of emotions that left him momentarily paralyzed. Joy, guilt, regret. They all collided in a wave that nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. "Your daughter?" Tori's voice cracked slightly, the mask of composure slipping as she looked between Nate and Celine. Her eyes widened as the truth began to dawn on her. "Nate, is she—" "She's his daughter," Celine confirmed, her tone firm yet devoid of malice. Her gaze stayed on Nate, silently urging him to respond, to say something, anything. Nate knelt slightly, his voice softening as he addressed the little girl for the first time. "Hi, Aria," he said, the sound of her name feeling both foreign and familiar on his tongue. "I'm Nate." Aria tilted her head, her bright blue eyes narrowing slightly as though assessing him. Hi, she said simply, her voice light and curious. Are you my dad? The room seemed to hold its breath, the weight of her question piercing through the lingering hum of the gathering. Nate swallowed hard, feeling the sharp edges of regret press against him. Yes, he said finally, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. I am. For a moment there was only silence. Then Arya gave a small nod, her grip on her stuffed animal tightening. Okay, she said, her tone matter-of-fact, as though she were filing the information away for later. Before anyone could say more, Tori stepped back, her expression a mixture of confusion, hurt, and rising anger. Excuse me, she said tersely, her voice trembling as she turned and walked briskly toward the other side of the room. Nate started to follow her, but Celine's voice stopped him. Let her go, Nate. She needs time. He turned back to Celine, his eyes filled with questions he couldn't yet put into words. Why now? He asked softly. Why bring her here? Celine's shoulders squared, her gaze steady. Because it's time, she replied. It's time for you to know her, and it's time for her to know you. Arya tugged gently at her mother's hand, looking up with wide, innocent eyes. Mommy, can I have a milkshake now? Celine smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from Arya's face. Of course, sweetheart. She glanced back at Nate, her expression unreadable. We'll talk later. As Celine led Arya toward the refreshment table, Nate remained rooted to the spot, his thoughts racing. He had spent years building a life of precision and control, but in just a few moments, everything had been upended. He had a daughter, a bright, curious, beautiful daughter, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure what came next. Nate sat in the dim glow of his penthouse later that night, the city's glittering skyline sprawled out before him like a tableau of his accomplishments. Yet the familiar view offered little comfort. His mind was a storm of questions and emotions, all circling back to one undeniable fact. He had a daughter, and she had walked into his life as effortlessly as if she had always been a part of it. The events of the evening replayed relentlessly in his mind. Arya's wide-eyed question, Tori's abrupt departure, and the unshakable calm in Celine's voice as she stated matter-of-factly that it was time. Time for him to know. Time for Arya to know. But time for what, exactly? To pick up the pieces of a decade-long silence, to reconcile the life he had built with the one he had unknowingly left behind. A sharp knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Nate sighed, running a hand through his hair as he stood to answer it. He half expected Tori, brimming with righteous anger, but when he opened the door, he found Celine instead. She stood there in her sleek black dress, her arms crossed, her expression poised but unyielding. "Can I come in?" she asked, her tone neutral. Nate stepped aside, gesturing her in. She moved past him into the spacious living area, her gaze briefly scanning the modern minimalist decor before settling on the view outside. "Still the same Nate," she said, almost to herself. "Everything polished, everything in its place." "Celine," Nate began, his voice heavy with unspoken questions. "Why didn't you tell me?" She turned to face him, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "Do you really need me to answer that?" she asked, her tone pointed. "Because I tried, Nate. Emails, calls, everything short of showing up at your office unannounced. You were too busy building your empire to notice." Nate's jaw tightened, guilt simmering beneath the surface. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "If I had—" "Would it have changed anything?" Celine interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "You were consumed by your ambition. You had no room for us back then, Nate, and I wasn't going to beg for your attention." Her words hit like a hammer, each one driving home the consequences of his choices. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Nate said, his voice trembling. "I thought I thought I was doing the right thing, building something that would secure a future for us. For us? Celine's laugh was bitter, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Nate, you left me behind before you even realized it. And when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't have the luxury of waiting for you to notice. Nate looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The weight of her words pressed down on him, leaving him grappling with the enormity of what he had missed. Celine took a deep breath, steadying herself. I wasn't going to let Aria grow up feeling like she was second to anything, or anyone, she continued. So I built a life for her, a stable, loving life, and you weren't a part of it because I didn't think you wanted to be. That's not fair, Nate countered, his voice sharper than he intended. He softened almost immediately. I didn't know Celine. I didn't know she existed. If I had, He paused, searching for the right words. I would have done things differently. Would you? Celine asked, her voice quieter now, almost tired. Because the Nate I knew back then wasn't ready for a family. He was ready for success, for prestige, for whatever it took to be on top. I didn't bring Aria into your world because I couldn't risk her being another thing you put aside for later. Her words hung heavy in the air, slicing through Nate's defenses. He had no rebuttal because deep down he knew she was right. The version of himself from 10 years ago had been relentless, single-minded, and incapable of seeing beyond the horizon of his own ambition. I've changed, he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. I know you don't have any reason to believe me, but I have. Celine studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. We'll see, Nate. Words are easy. Actions take time. They fell into a tense silence, the hum of the city below filling the void. Finally, Celine straightened her posture and gestured toward the door. I should go. Aria's waiting for me. Nate took a step forward, a pang of desperation cutting through him. Celine, wait, he said. I don't want to waste more time. I want to get to know her. Aria. I want to be her father. Celine's hand hovered on the doorknob as she turned to look at him, her eyes softening just slightly. That's not a decision you make overnight, Nate, she said. If you're serious about this, it's going to take more than a few promises. She deserves someone who shows up, every time. I will, Nate said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. Celine nodded slowly, a flicker of something, hope, maybe, crossing her face. We'll see, she said again, her voice more subdued this time. For now, just take it one step at a time. Aria doesn't need grand gestures. She just needs you to show up. As she opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, Nate felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. He closed the door behind her and turned back toward the room, his gaze once again falling on the shimmering skyline. It looked different now, somehow dimmer, less significant. The symbols of his success no longer held the same meaning. His phone buzzed on the counter, pulling him back to the present. The caller ID flashed Tori. He hesitated before answering, already bracing himself for what was coming. Nate, Tori's voice came through sharp and controlled, masking the hurt beneath. We need to talk. I know, he said softly, already dreading the conversation that would follow. Good, Tori replied, her tone firm, because I'm not sure I can do this anymore. The line went silent as Nate's chest tightened. For the first time in years, he felt utterly powerless, caught between the life he had meticulously built and the one he had unknowingly abandoned. And as he stared out at the city he had once thought of as his greatest achievement, he realized that his next steps, his choices, would determine not just his future, but the lives of those he had hurt most. The quiet buzz of the local coffee shop provided an unexpected comfort to Nate as he waited in a corner booth. The cafe, nestled in the heart of Celine's neighborhood, was worlds apart from the polished skyscrapers he usually frequented. Here the walls were adorned with local art, mismatched chairs added charm, and the hum of conversation mixed with the sound of steaming milk. For the first time in years, Nate felt out of place, and he realized that might not be a bad thing. He glanced at his watch, a habit he hadn't shaken despite his decision to clear his schedule for the day. He had texted Celine earlier that morning, asking if he could spend time with Aria. Her response had been measured, guarded but willing. "I'll bring her to the cafe at 10. No promises, Nate." The door opened, and his breath caught when he saw them. Aria bounded in first, her small backpack bouncing against her as she scanned the room. When her bright blue eyes landed on Nate, she hesitated for a moment before offering a shy wave. Celine followed close behind, her expression a mix of calm resolve and caution. "Hey," Nate greeted as they approached. He stood, feeling awkward and unsure of himself in a way he hadn't since his first big client meeting years ago. "Thanks for coming." Celine nodded, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. "I'll grab a coffee while you two talk," she said, her tone casual yet clearly intentional. Without waiting for a response, she walked toward the counter, leaving Nate and Aria alone. Aria slid into the booth across from Nate, her small hands clutching the strap of her backpack. "Hi," she said, her voice light but curious. "Hi, Aria," Nate replied, his tone soft as he settled back into his seat. "Thanks for coming to meet me." She tilted her head slightly, studying him in the same way she might a new puzzle. "Mum said you wanted to talk to me." "I do," Nate admitted, his heart pounding in his chest. "I wanted to get to know you better. You're pretty amazing, you know that." Aria's cheeks flushed slightly, but she tried to hide her smile by fiddling with her backpack. "I'm not amazing," she said quietly. "I'm just Aria." "Just Aria is still pretty special," Nate said, his voice steady. "Your mum tells me you like to draw. What kind of things do you like to draw?" Her eyes brightened at the mention of drawing, and she quickly unzipped her backpack, pulling out a well-worn sketchpad. "Everything," she said simply, "but I like animals the most." She flipped to a page filled with intricate sketches of foxes, deer, and birds, her small fingers tracing the lines. "This one's my favorite," she said, pointing to a fox curled under a tree. "Mum says it looks like the one we saw at the park once." Nate leaned closer, marveling at the detail. "You're really talented," he said honestly. "This is incredible, Aria." Her shy smile returned, and she glanced up at him. "Do you draw?" Nate hesitated, surprised by the question. "I used to, a long time ago," he admitted, "before I started designing buildings. But I don't think I was ever as good as you." Aria giggled, the sound light and infectious. "Maybe you can try again. Mum says it's never too late to start over." Nate smiled at Aria's words, her innocence striking a chord he hadn't felt in years. "Your mum's right," he said softly. "It's never too late to start over." For a few moments, they flipped through her sketchpad together. Nate found himself asking questions about her drawings, why she chose certain colors, what inspired specific pieces, and Aria's excitement grew with every answer. Her confidence seemed to blossom as she shared her creative process, and Nate couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He had missed so much already, but maybe he could still be a part of her journey moving forward. As they talked, Celine returned, carrying a coffee and sitting at a nearby table. She didn't interfere, giving them space while keeping a watchful eye. Nate noticed her, of course. How could he not? The way she observed them, her guarded expression softening as she saw Aria's laughter, was a reminder of the life she had built without him. It was a life he desperately wanted to understand and become a part of. "Do you like your job?" Aria asked suddenly, pulling Nate's attention back to her. Nate blinked at the unexpected question. I do, he said after a moment. I've always loved building things, creating spaces where people can live, work, or just enjoy themselves. But he hesitated, realizing he wanted to be honest with her. Sometimes I think I've focused on it too much and missed out on other important things. Arya tilted her head, her curious gaze unwavering. Like what? Like getting to know you, Nate admitted. The words felt heavy, but necessary. I didn't even know how amazing you are until now, and I wish I hadn't missed all the things that make you, you. Arya's expression shifted, a mixture of confusion and something softer, maybe understanding. You didn't know about me? She asked, her voice quiet. No, Nate said, his voice thick with regret. I didn't. But now that I do, I want to be here for you, if you'll let me. Arya studied him for a moment before giving a small nod. Okay, she said simply. But you have to mean it. Nate swallowed hard, his resolve strengthening. I do, he promised. Before Arya could respond, her gaze shifted behind him. Mom's watching, she said, her tone light but teasing. Nate glanced back at Celine, who quickly averted her gaze and took a sip of her coffee. He chuckled softly and turned back to Arya. She just wants to make sure I'm doing a good job, he said. What do you think? Am I doing okay so far? Arya grinned. You're doing okay, but you have to draw something next time. Deal, Nate said with a smile. I'll bring my sketch pad. When it was time for them to leave, Nate walked them to the door. As Celine helped Arya put on her backpack, she turned to Nate with a guarded but sincere expression. She's opening up to you, she said quietly. That's a good start. I won't let her down, Nate replied, his voice firm. Or you. Celine nodded, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer. We'll see, she said, her tone cautious, but not dismissive. One step at a time. As they walked away, Nate felt a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about rebuilding what he had lost. It was about building something entirely new, something better. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Tori Ellis sat in her pristine office, the soft glow of a desk lamp highlighting the glossy pages of a bridal magazine sprawled before her. Yet she wasn't looking at the carefully curated photos of floral arrangements or wedding venues. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the rehearsal dinner. Specifically, the moment she saw Celine and the little girl, a girl who could have been Nate's mirror image at that age. She closed the magazine with a frustrated sigh and leaned back in her chair. Her engagement ring, a dazzling piece of jewelry that symbolized her and Nate's meticulously planned future, caught the light. But now it felt heavier than ever. There was a knock at her door, and before she could answer, Maya Lopez, Nate's assistant, stepped inside. Miss Ellis, Maya began, her professional demeanor as polished as ever. I just wanted to confirm your final thoughts on the wedding schedule. Tori raised an eyebrow, her voice tight. Has Nate mentioned any changes to the guest list? Maya hesitated, her composure flickering for a brief moment. I believe Mr. Archer has everything handled, she said diplomatically. If you'd like, I can double-check. No, Tori interrupted, waving her off. That won't be necessary. She paused, her mind racing. But thank you, Maya. As the door clicked shut behind her, Tori stood and moved to the window, her arms crossed tightly. She had always known Nate to be guarded, his past a carefully locked vault she never pushed too hard to open. But now it seemed that past was crashing into their present, threatening to unravel everything. Meanwhile, at Archer and Company, Nate sat in his office, staring at the architectural models lining the walls. The usual pride he felt in his work was nowhere to be found. His thoughts kept drifting to Arya and the moments they had shared at the cafe. The way she had smiled shyly at him, The way her eyes lit up when she talked about drawing, it was like seeing a part of himself he hadn't realized he had been missing. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. Tori's name flashed on the screen. He hesitated before answering. Tori. "Nate," she said, her voice sharp but controlled. "We need to talk. In person." "Of course," he said immediately, guilt gnawing at him. "When?" "I'm at my office," she replied. "Now would be good." Nate didn't need to ask what the conversation was about. He already knew. And as he grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator, he felt the weight of everything he had built pressing down on him, the life he had constructed, and the cracks now beginning to show. Nate entered Tori's office, his footsteps echoing faintly against the polished hardwood floor. Tori stood by the window, her back to him, the late afternoon sunlight casting a golden glow over her perfectly styled hair. She didn't turn as he approached, her posture rigid, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. "Tori," Nate began, his voice soft but steady. "Thanks for seeing me." She turned slowly, her expression a mix of hurt and carefully controlled anger. "You make it sound like I had a choice," she said, her tone sharp. She gestured toward the chair opposite her desk. "Sit." Nate obeyed, feeling the weight of her gaze as he lowered himself into the chair. Tori remained standing, her arms still crossed as she leaned against the edge of her desk. "So," she began, her voice cold. "Who is she?" Nate blinked, caught off guard. "Celine?" "Don't play dumb, Nate," Tori snapped, her composure cracking slightly. "You know exactly what I mean. Who is she to you? Why was she there? And who is the little girl who looks just like you?" Nate ran a hand over his face, the weight of the truth bearing down on him. He had spent years compartmentalizing his life, keeping everything neat and orderly. But now the walls he had built were crumbling, and there was no avoiding the fallout. "Celine is someone I was close to. A long time ago," he admitted. "And the little girl, Aria, she's my daughter." Tori's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "Your daughter," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "And when exactly were you planning on telling me this? Before the wedding? After? Or were you hoping I'd never find out?" "I didn't know," Nate said quickly, his voice desperate. "I didn't know about her until recently. Celine never told me, at least not in a way I could hear. She tried, but I was so focused on my work, I didn't see it." Tori stared at him, her expression a storm of emotions, shock, betrayal, anger. "You didn't know," she repeated, her tone flat. "And now what, Nate? You think you can just step in and play happy families? What does that mean for us?" Nate felt the sting of her words, but he didn't look away. "I don't have all the answers, Tori," he said honestly. "I'm still figuring this out. But Aria is my daughter, and I can't ignore that. I won't." Tori let out a shaky breath, turning away from him to face the window again. "And where does that leave me?" she asked quietly. "Where do I fit into all of this?" Nate stood, crossing the room to stand beside her. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice soft. "But I have to be honest with you, and with myself. Aria and Celine, they're part of my life now. I can't change that." Tori turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You already lost me, Nate," she said, her voice trembling. "The moment you decided to bring her into this without telling me, you made your choice, and it wasn't me." Her words hit him like a blow, the finality of them sinking in. "Tori," he began, but she shook her head. "No," she said firmly, "this is over. You and I, this wedding, it's done." Nate stared at her, his heart sinking. He wanted to argue, to plead with her to reconsider, but he knew she was right. He had made his choice, even if he hadn't fully realized it at the time. Tori took a step back, her voice steady, but filled with pain. "I hope you figure out what you want, Nate, and I hope it's worth it." With that, she turned and walked out of the office, leaving Nate alone with the weight of his decisions. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where she had been. The life he had built was unraveling, but for the first time, he wondered if it was a necessary step toward building something real. As he left the office and stepped out into the crisp evening air, his thoughts turned to Arya. She was his anchor now, the one undeniable truth in the chaos. And as he headed back to his penthouse, he resolved to do whatever it took to be the father she deserved. The park buzzed with life on Saturday morning, the air filled with the sounds of children laughing and the rhythmic chirping of birds. Nate stood near a shaded picnic table, clutching a small take-out coffee cup in one hand and a sketch pad in the other. He scanned the open green space, his heart racing slightly as he spotted Celine and Arya walking toward him. Arya wore a bright yellow dress, her hair bouncing in curls as she skipped ahead of her mother. She was carrying a colorful kite, the strings trailing behind her like a ribbon of joy. Celine, dressed casually in jeans and a loose blouse, followed at a slower pace, her eyes meeting Nate's as she approached. Her expression was calm but wary, a reminder of the careful boundaries she was maintaining. "Hi, Nate," Arya greeted him cheerfully, her bright blue eyes sparkling in the morning sun. "I brought my kite. Can we fly it?" "Of course," Nate said with a smile, crouching slightly to meet her eye level. "That looks like a great kite. Did you make it yourself?" Arya nodded enthusiastically. "Mom helped me with the design," she said, glancing back at Celine, who had reached the table and set down a small canvas bag. "She did most of the work," Celine added, her tone light but reserved. "I just helped with the tricky parts." Nate straightened, his smile softening as he addressed Celine. "Thanks for coming." She gave a small nod, crossing her arms loosely as she watched Arya unwind the kite's string. "She's excited. She hasn't stopped talking about it since you called." "That makes two of us," Nate said honestly, his gaze shifting back to Arya. He hesitated, then added, "I brought a sketch pad. I thought maybe we could draw something together later." Celine's eyes flicked to the pad in his hand, her expression softening just slightly. "She'll like that," she said. Arya, now satisfied that her kite was ready, turned back to Nate, holding out the spool of string. "Can you help me get it in the air?" "Absolutely," Nate said, taking the spool and leading her to a clear patch of grass. Celine followed at a distance, her arms still crossed, but her expression relaxed as she watched them. With Nate's help, the kite soared into the air, its vibrant colors dancing against the blue sky. Arya squealed with delight, gripping the string tightly as Nate crouched beside her, offering guidance. For a moment, it was as though the world around them faded away, leaving only the sound of Arya's laughter and the gentle rustle of the kite in the breeze. Celine watched from the sidelines, her emotions conflicted. Seeing Nate with Arya, so engaged and present, tugged at something deep within her. She wanted to believe he was genuine, that his newfound commitment wasn't fleeting, but a decade of disappointment couldn't be erased overnight. After a while, Arya handed the spool to Nate, her face flushed with excitement. "You hold it for a bit," she said, before darting off to chase a butterfly flitting nearby. Nate took the string, adjusting it carefully as he watched her skip across the grass. "She's something else," he said quietly, glancing back at Celine, who had joined him near the edge of the field. "She is," Celine replied, her tone softer now. "She's got a lot of you in her, you know. The way she lights up when she's excited, the way she throws herself into something with everything she has." Nate smiled faintly, his grip tightening on the spool. "I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all. She's incredible, Celine. You've done an amazing job with her." Celine's eyes flickered with a mix of gratitude and caution. "It hasn't always been easy," she admitted, "but she's my world. Every choice I've made has been for her." "I know," Nate said, his voice heavy with regret. "And I can't change the past, but I want to be part of her world now. I want to be there for her, and for you, if you'll let me." Celine didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on Aria as the little girl twirled in the sunlight. Finally she spoke, her tone measured. "It's not about letting you in, Nate. It's about consistency. It's about showing up, not just when it's convenient, but when it's hard, too." "I understand," Nate said earnestly. "I'm not going anywhere, Celine. I know I have to prove that to you both, and I will." Before Celine could respond, a sharp cry pierced the air. Both she and Nate turned toward Aria, who was sitting on the ground, clutching her ankle. They rushed to her side, their concern mirrored in their expressions. "What happened, sweetheart?" Celine asked, kneeling beside her. "I tripped on the root," Aria said, her voice trembling as tears welled in her eyes. "It hurts." "Let me see," Nate said gently, his tone calm as he inspected her ankle. It was slightly swollen, but didn't appear to be serious. "I think it's just a sprain. Let's get you to the table so we can ice it." Celine nodded, scooping Aria into her arms. But before she could stand, Nate reached out. "Let me," he said. Celine hesitated briefly before allowing him to take Aria. As Nate carried her back to the table, Aria clung to him, her small arms wrapping tightly around his neck. "Does this mean you're staying, Dad?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. The word "Dad" hit Nate like a tidal wave, filling him with a mixture of joy and responsibility. "Yes, Aria," he said softly, his voice steady despite the surge of emotion. "I'm staying." Celine, walking just behind them, caught his words. For the first time in years, a flicker of hope crossed her guarded expression. She knew actions spoke louder than words, but for now she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Nate meant what he said. Nate sat in his car outside his family's Napa Valley estate, the rolling vineyards stretching out in neat rows before him. The golden glow of the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the landscape, but its warmth did little to ease the unease in his chest. This visit wasn't just a retreat to familiar comforts. It was a confrontation with the person who had always been his harshest but most honest critic, his mother. He stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel underfoot echoing in the still air, and approached the grand yet unpretentious home. The heavy oak door opened before he could knock, revealing Margaret Archer. Despite her small stature and silver-streaked hair, her presence was commanding, her sharp blue eyes, so much like Nate's, narrowing as she took him in. "Nathaniel," she said in her brisk, no-nonsense tone, "I was starting to think you'd forgotten how to find your way back here." "Hi, Mum," Nate replied, managing a faint smile. "I've been busy." Margaret stepped aside to let him in, her expression softening slightly. "You've always been busy. Come in. I just made tea." The house smelled of lavender and aged wood, a comforting mix of nostalgia and home. Nate followed his mother to the kitchen, where the kettle whistled softly on the stove. She poured 2 cups of tea and motioned for him to sit at the long farmhouse table. "Now," Margaret began, settling across from him, "why are you really here? And don't tell me it's for tea." Nate let out a small laugh, his hands wrapping around the warm ceramic mug. "I needed to talk to you," he admitted. "A lot has changed recently." Margaret leaned back, folding her hands neatly on the table. "I'm listening." He hesitated, unsure how to begin. "Do you remember Celine?" Her expression didn't shift, but there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "The artist," she said, her voice neutral. "Yes, I remember her. You let her go." Nate nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. She's back. And so is my daughter, Arya. For the first time, Margaret's composure faltered, her eyebrows lifting in surprise. Your daughter? She echoed, leaning forward slightly. Nathaniel, what are you talking about? Nate explained everything, the years of silence, the moment he saw Arya for the first time, and his determination to make things right. Margaret listened intently, her sharp gaze never leaving his face. When he finished, she let out a long breath, her expression unreadable. So, she said finally, her tone measured, you've decided to be a father. And what about the life you've built, the career, the fiancé? Where does this leave them? Tori ended things, Nate admitted, the words heavy with finality. And the career? I'm not sure anymore. None of it feels the same. Margaret regarded him for a long moment before speaking. You've spent your whole life chasing success, Nathaniel. But what good is success if it leaves you empty? Maybe it's time to build something that lasts. Nate stared down at his tea, his mother's words hitting him harder than he cared to admit. Margaret had always been a grounding force in his life, her advice sharp and often painfully honest, but it was exactly what he needed to hear. I want that, he said finally, his voice steady but quiet. I want to build something that lasts, for Arya, for Celine, but I don't know where to start. Margaret reached across the table, her hand resting lightly over his. Start with what you've neglected the most, she said. Time. Time with her, time with them. You've spent years measuring success in skyscrapers and headlines. It's time to measure it in moments that matter. Nate nodded, her words settling in his chest like a solid foundation. I've already started seeing Arya, he said, a small smile creeping onto his face. She's amazing, Mum. Smart, creative, so full of life. She reminds me of Celine in a lot of ways. Margaret's lips quirked into a rare smile. She sounds wonderful. And what about Celine? How does she feel about all of this? She's cautious, Nate admitted. I don't blame her. I let her down before, and she's not going to let me waltz back into their lives without proving myself. But I'm committed. I'm going to show her that I've changed. Margaret leaned back, studying him with a mix of pride and skepticism. It won't be easy. Building trust never is. But if you mean what you say, Nathaniel, then you'll find a way. Their conversation shifted to lighter topics, family memories, updates on Margaret's latest garden project, but Nate left the table with a renewed sense of purpose. As he stood to leave, his mother stopped him at the door. Nate, she said, her tone softer now. Don't let fear stop you from moving forward. You've already lost enough time. He nodded, her words echoing in his mind as he drove back toward San Francisco. The sprawling vineyards gave way to city streets, the familiar skyline looming ahead. This time, though, the sight didn't fill him with the same pride it once had. Instead, it felt like a reminder of what he had been chasing and what he had left behind. The next day, Nate walked into Archer and Company with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. His assistant, Maya, looked up from her desk, her expression curious as she saw him approach. "Cancel my meetings for the week," he said, his tone firm but calm. "I'm taking some time off." Maya blinked, caught off guard. "All of them?" "Yes," Nate said. "It's overdue." Without waiting for her response, he stepped into his office and closed the door. The architectural models that once filled him with pride now felt like relics of another life. He moved to the window, staring out at the city below. It was time to shift his focus. The skyscrapers would stand without him, but Arya and Celine needed him to be present, to show up, as Celine had put it. And he was determined to do just that. The gallery was alive with energy, a symphony of muted conversations and the soft hum of instrumental music floating through the air. Nate stood near the entrance, scanning the room for familiar faces among the sea of art enthusiasts. The walls were adorned with vibrant paintings and intricate sculptures, each piece a testament to the talent of the local artists being showcased. But it wasn't the art that had brought him here. It was Celine. He spotted her near the back of the room, standing next to a collection of her own works. She was speaking with a group of admirers, her face lighting up as she explained the inspiration behind her pieces. Aria stood beside her, holding a stack of brochures with her mother's name printed across the top. The little girl handed them out with an enthusiasm that drew smiles from everyone she approached. Nate took a deep breath and approached slowly, weaving his way through the crowd. He didn't want to interrupt, but couldn't help feeling a pull toward the two people who had become his center of gravity. "Mommy?" Aria called out as she caught sight of him. Her voice rose above the hum of the crowd, drawing Celine's attention. Celine turned, her expression shifting to one of cautious surprise as Nate stepped closer. "Hi," he said, his voice warm but tentative. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Celine replied, her tone polite but guarded. "We weren't expecting you." "I wanted to surprise you," Nate admitted, crouching slightly so he was at eye level with Aria. "And to see what you've been working on. This place is amazing." Aria grinned, holding up a brochure. "Mommy's art is over there," she said, pointing to a display across the room. "Want me to show you?" "I'd love that," Nate said, standing and looking to Celine for confirmation. She nodded, a small, hesitant smile tugging at her lips. As Aria led him to the display, Nate marveled at the intricate details of Celine's work. Her paintings were vibrant and full of life, each stroke telling a story. "These are incredible," he said, his admiration genuine. "You have a gift, Celine." "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment before flickering away. "It's been a long time coming." Aria chimed in, her voice full of pride. "Mommy says art makes people happy. That's why she does it." Nate smiled, looking between them. "She's right. It does." As the evening wore on, Nate stayed by their side, helping Aria hand out brochures and engaging with the visitors who stopped by to admire Celine's work. For the first time, he felt like he was truly part of their world, a feeling that both humbled and exhilarated him. As the crowd began to thin and the gallery quieted, Celine found herself standing beside Nate near one of her larger pieces, a sweeping abstract painting in hues of blue and gold. Aria had wandered off to the refreshment table, delighting in the small selection of cookies and juice. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable, but charged with unspoken thoughts. "You fit in better than I expected," Celine said finally, her voice light but tinged with something deeper. Nate turned to her, his expression earnest. "I wanted to be here," he said simply. "Not just for Aria, but for you. Seeing all of this, your work, your world, it makes me realize how much I missed." Celine studied him for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. "It's not easy, you know," she said quietly. "Being a part of this, of us. It's not just showing up at events or flying a kite in the park. It's everything in between." "I know," Nate replied, his tone steady. "And I'm not here for the easy parts. I'm here for all of it, whatever it takes." Celine's lips curved into a small, almost wistful smile. "You say that now," she said, glancing down at her hands. "But there will be moments when it's messy, when it's hard. Aria deserves stability, Nate. She deserves someone who won't disappear when things get complicated." "I'm not going anywhere," Nate said firmly, his voice unwavering. "I know I've made mistakes, Celine, and I know I can't fix the past. But I can be here now, and I can be better. For her. For you." Celine let out a soft sigh, her guard lowering just slightly. You've come a long way, she admitted. I can see that. But trust takes time, Nate. It's not something you can rush. I'm not in a hurry, Nate replied. I'll wait as long as it takes. Before Celine could respond, Arya reappeared, a cookie in one hand and a cup of juice in the other. Mommy, can we go home now? She asked, her voice sweet and sleepy. Celine nodded, brushing a strand of hair from Arya's face. Of course, sweetheart. It's been a long day. Nate crouched down to Arya's level, his smile warm. You did great tonight, he said. Your mum's art is amazing, but you're a pretty great helper too. Arya grinned, her cheeks reddening slightly. Thanks, she said shyly. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Nate walked with them to the door. The cool night air greeted them as they stepped outside, the quiet of the city settling around them. Thank you for letting me be a part of this, Nate said to Celine, his voice low but sincere. Celine met his gaze, her expression softening. It was good to have you here, she said, and though her tone was cautious, it carried a hint of something that felt like hope. As they walked away, Nate stood for a moment, watching them disappear down the street. The warmth of the evening lingered, not just in the air but in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was building something real, something worth holding on to. The park was quiet in the early evening, the golden hues of the setting sun filtering through the tall trees and casting long shadows across the grass. Nate stood near a small clearing, his heart pounding in his chest as he carefully adjusted the picnic setup. A soft plaid blanket spread neatly on the grass, anchored by a basket filled with sandwiches, fruit, and Arya's favorite chocolate chip cookies. Nearby, a small easel held a blank canvas, a gift he had picked out specifically for Celine. Arya skipped around the clearing, her laughter bright and carefree as she inspected the setup. Mommy's going to love this, she declared, her excitement infectious. I hope so, Nate said with a nervous smile, kneeling to straighten a bouquet of sunflowers he had placed at the center of the blanket. You've got to help me make sure everything's perfect. It already is, Arya said confidently, plopping down on the blanket and adjusting her dress. She picked up a napkin and began folding it into a clumsy triangle. See? I'm helping. Nate laughed, his nerves easing slightly as he watched her. You're the best helper I could ask for, he said, reaching over to ruffle her hair. Now remember what we talked about? Arya nodded solemnly, her expression suddenly serious. I stay quiet until you're done talking to Mommy. Then I can show her the picture I made. That's right, Nate said. This is really important, Arya. I need Mommy to know how much we both care about her. She already knows, Arya said matter-of-factly, her confidence catching Nate off guard. But it's good to tell her again. Before Nate could respond, the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path caught his attention. He turned to see Celine approaching, her silhouette framed by the fading sunlight. She wore a simple sundress, her auburn hair loose and flowing, and she carried a small tote bag slung over one shoulder. Her expression was curious, her pace slowing as she took in the sight of the picnic. What's all this? She asked, her tone a mix of surprise and amusement. Nate stood, brushing off his hands nervously. It's, a little surprise, he said, his voice soft. For you. For us. Celine raised an eyebrow, glancing at Arya, who was sitting on the blanket with a mischievous grin. Did you help with this? She asked. Yup, Arya chirped proudly. But Daddy did most of it. Celine froze for a moment, her gaze flicking to Nate. He held her gaze steadily, the word hanging between them, unspoken but heavy with meaning. Come sit, Nate said gently, gesturing to the blanket. We've got dinner, and there's something I'd like to talk to you about. Celine hesitated, her eyes searching his face for answers, but finally she nodded and joined them on the blanket. As Arya handed her a napkin with great ceremony, Nate took a deep breath, preparing for what came next. As they settled onto the blanket, Nate handed Celine a plate, his hands slightly trembling despite his effort to appear calm. Aria busied herself arranging the napkins and sipping from a juice box, her chatter filling the air and easing some of the tension. Celine glanced at Nate, her brow furrowing slightly as she noticed his uncharacteristic nervousness. "This is really sweet," she said softly. "But it feels like there's more to this than a picnic." Nate set his plate aside, his heart pounding as he met her gaze. "There is," he admitted. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Celine, I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us, about Aria, about what I want for the future. And I realized something important." Celine watched him intently, her expression guarded but open. "What's that?" "That I don't want to waste any more time," Nate said, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. "I spent so many years chasing things that didn't matter as much as I thought they did. But now I know what really matters. It's you. It's Aria. It's the life we could have together." Celine's lips parted slightly, her surprise evident, but she said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Nate reached for the small box he had tucked under the corner of the blanket. He opened it to reveal a simple but elegant ring, the diamond catching the last rays of sunlight. "Celine, I know I have a lot to prove, and I know trust takes time, but I love you. I always have. And I want to spend the rest of my life making up for the time we lost, if you'll let me." The world seemed to pause as Celine stared at the ring, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a moment she didn't speak, and Nate's heart sank, the silence stretching between them. Finally she looked up, her voice steady but soft. "Nate, this is beautiful, and I believe you mean every word. But this isn't something I can say yes to right now." Nate's chest tightened, but he nodded, his respect for her honesty overriding his disappointment. "I understand," he said quietly. "I just needed you to know how I feel, and I'll keep showing you every day until you're ready." Celine gave him a small, sad smile. "You've come a long way," she said. "But like I've told you before, trust takes time. I don't want to rush this, for Aria's sake, and for ours." Aria, who had been watching quietly from the sidelines, crawled closer, sensing the gravity of the moment. She placed a small drawing in Celine's lap, a picture of the three of them holding hands under a bright blue sky. "It's us," she said softly, "like a family." Celine's resolve softened as she looked at the drawing, her fingers tracing the colorful lines. She glanced at Nate, her voice trembling slightly as she said, "We'll get there. One step at a time." Nate reached out, his hand brushing hers lightly. "That's all I want," he said, "a chance to get there." As the three of them sat together under the fading light, the quiet promise of a shared future hung in the air, a future built not on grand gestures, but on the steady, patient steps they were taking together. The construction site buzzed with activity, the clatter of tools and hum of machinery blending with the chatter of workers. Nate stood at the edge of the lot, his gaze fixed on the framework of a pavilion slowly taking shape in the center of the space. Unlike the skyscrapers and sprawling office complexes he was accustomed to designing, this project was different, smaller, more personal, and deeply meaningful. Aria's school had recently received funding for a new community art space, and when Nate heard about the opportunity, he had immediately volunteered to lead the project. It was the perfect way to blend his architectural expertise with Celine's artistic vision, creating something that reflected both their worlds. Celine arrived shortly after, her auburn hair tied back in a loose ponytail, a sketchpad tucked under her arm. Aria trailed behind her, clutching a box of art supplies. The little girl's excitement was palpable as she skipped ahead to greet Nate. "Hi, Daddy," she called out, her voice cutting through the din of the construction site. She ran to him, holding up the box. "Look, I brought the paints you asked for." Nate crouched down to meet her eye level, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Thanks, kiddo. These are perfect." He ruffled her hair gently before standing to greet Celine. "Thanks for coming," he said, his tone soft but earnest. "I wanted you to see how it's coming along, and to get your input on the design elements." Celine glanced around the site, taking in the skeletal framework of the pavilion and the surrounding open space. "It's coming together nicely," she said, her voice thoughtful. "What kind of input are you looking for?" "Details that make it more inviting," Nate explained. "The plan is solid structurally, but I think your touch could bring it to life. Something that reflects the community, something meaningful." Celine tilted her head, considering his words. "I can work with that," she said, opening her sketch pad. She began to flip through rough concepts she had sketched earlier, her fingers lingering on one page. "What about incorporating some mosaic work? Something the kids can contribute to, so they feel like they're part of it." Nate leaned closer, his brow furrowing slightly as he studied the design. "That's a great idea," he said. "We could dedicate a section of the pavilion to it, maybe on one of the exterior walls." Arya tugged at Celine's sleeve, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Can I help with the mosaic, Mommy?" "I'm really good at sticking things," Celine laughed, her tension easing as she knelt beside Arya. "Of course you can help. This project is for everyone, including you." As the three of them discussed ideas, Nate felt a quiet sense of contentment settle over him. This wasn't just about building a structure, it was about building something together, something that would stand as a testament to their growing bond. As the day wore on, the trio's collaboration brought the project to life in a way Nate hadn't anticipated. Celine sketched out a design for the mosaic, a vibrant swirl of colors that represented diversity and creativity, while Nate worked with the construction crew to determine the best placement for it. Arya darted between them, offering suggestions with the unfiltered confidence of a child. "What if we put a sun in the middle?" Arya suggested, pointing at the sketch. "So it feels happy when people look at it." Celine looked at Nate, a smile tugging at her lips. "She has a point. A sun could tie it all together." Nate nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "A sun it is," he said. "Arya, you're officially our creative director." Arya beamed, standing a little taller at the title. "Does that mean I get to tell people what to do?" she asked, her voice full of excitement. "Within reason," Celine replied, laughing softly. "Let's not get carried away." By mid-afternoon, the framework of the pavilion was complete, and the crew began preparing the wall for the mosaic. Celine sat cross-legged on the ground with Arya, sorting through small tiles in a rainbow of colors. Nate joined them, rolling up his sleeves as he crouched beside the two. "This reminds me of when we used to work on projects together," Nate said to Celine, his voice low enough that Arya, now absorbed in arranging tiles, wouldn't hear. Celine glanced at him, her expression softening. "Except back then, we didn't have a little helper with big ideas." "She's incredible," Nate said, his gaze lingering on Arya. "And so are you. I don't think I ever told you how much I admired your creativity back then. And now, watching you work, it's inspiring." Celine hesitated, her fingers pausing over a pile of blue tiles. "You've changed, Nate," she said finally. "There's a sincerity in the way you're showing up now. It's different. Better." "I mean it," Nate said, his voice steady. "You and Arya have made me realize what's really important. I'm not just building a pavilion here. I'm building something that matters. For us." Celine didn't respond immediately, her focus shifting back to the mosaic design. But her silence wasn't dismissive. It was contemplative, her guard beginning to lower as she let herself consider the possibility of a future together. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the pavilion began to take on its final shape. Workers cleaned up for the day, leaving the mosaic wall as a blank canvas for the community to complete in the coming weeks. Celine and Aria stood with Nate in the fading light, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of a day well spent. "Thank you for letting me be part of this," Nate said quietly, his gaze shifting between them. "I'll do everything I can to keep earning this." Celine met his eyes, her smile small but genuine. "You're off to a good start," she said. Aria, now clutching a handful of leftover tiles, tugged at Nate's sleeve. "Can we come back tomorrow and finish the sun?" Nate chuckled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Absolutely," he said. "This is just the beginning." As they walked away from the site together, the glow of the pavilion behind them, the bond between the three of them felt stronger than ever. They weren't just building a structure, they were building a life, one careful step at a time. The warm afternoon breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass through the garden at the Archer family estate. Rows of white chairs were arranged on either side of an aisle, lined with petals in vibrant shades of blue and gold, echoing the mosaic design from the pavilion. At the end of the aisle, a wooden arch adorned with sunflowers and soft drapes stood under the shade of an old oak tree, its branches stretching protectively over the gathering. Nate adjusted his tie nervously, standing near the arch as guests began to take their seats. The faint murmur of conversation and occasional laughter filled the air, but his focus was entirely on the path ahead. Today was more than just a ceremony. It was a culmination of everything he had worked to rebuild. His journey back to Celine and Aria had been anything but easy, but every step had brought him closer to this moment. Margaret Archer appeared beside him, her sharp eyes softened by a rare smile. "You look nervous," she observed, her voice tinged with warmth. "I never thought I'd see the day when Nathaniel Archer was unsure of himself." Nate chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "It's not nerves," he said, though his fidgeting betrayed him. I just want everything to be perfect." Margaret placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Perfect isn't the goal, Nathaniel. Real is. And what you've built with them, that's as real as it gets." Her words settled over him like a balm, and he nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Before he could respond, the soft strains of a piano began to play, signaling the start of the ceremony. Nate turned toward the aisle, his heart pounding in anticipation. Aria was the first to appear, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers and walking carefully down the aisle. She wore a pale yellow dress that swayed with each step, her hair pinned back with a matching ribbon. Her face lit up as she caught sight of Nate, and she gave him a small wave, which he returned with a wide smile. When Aria reached the front, she took her place beside Nate, slipping her hand into his. "You look really nervous," she whispered, her voice full of amusement. "Just a little," Nate admitted, his tone light but honest. "You're doing great, though." "I know," Aria said confidently, her grin contagious. The crowd rose as the music swelled, and Celine appeared at the end of the aisle. She was radiant, her white gown flowing like water as she walked toward them, her gaze steady and her smile soft. Each step she took seemed to erase the distance of the past, leaving only the present and the future they were about to create. Nate felt his chest tighten as she approached, her beauty matched only by the strength and grace that had drawn him to her all those years ago. When she reached him, he took her hands in his eyes never leaving hers. "You're breathtaking," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Celine smiled, her fingers squeezing his gently. "You don't look so bad yourself," she replied, her tone light but filled with warmth. The officiant cleared his throat softly, drawing the attention of the gathered crowd. As the ceremony began, the sunlight filtered through the branches above, casting dappled patterns on the ground around them. Nate and Celine stood hand in hand, their connection palpable to everyone watching. Aria stood proudly beside them, her smile bright as she looked up at her parents. "We are gathered here today," the officiant began, his voice calm and steady, "to celebrate the union of two people whose love has proven its strength, resilience, and ability to grow. Celine and Nathaniel's journey has not been without challenges, but it is through those challenges that they have found their way back to each other and created something truly beautiful." As the officiant spoke, Nate's thoughts wandered to the path that had led them here. The years of separation, the unexpected reunion, and the moments of vulnerability that had brought him closer to Celine and Aria. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the second chance he had been given and for the family they were building together. When it was time for the vows, Nate took a deep breath, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Celine, you've always been my compass, even when I didn't realize it. Your strength, your kindness, and your unwavering love for Aria have shown me what truly matters. I promise to honor you, to stand by you, and to cherish the family we've created. This is my commitment, to be the husband and father you both deserve, every single day." Celine's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she smiled, her voice soft but strong as she spoke her own vows. "Nate, you've shown me that people can grow, that love can be patient, and that sometimes second chances are worth the risk. I promise to trust in the life we're building, to share in your joys and your struggles, and to create a home filled with love and laughter for Aria and for us." The officiant nodded, his own expression warm. "And now Aria has prepared something special she'd like to say." Aria stepped forward, her small frame bursting with excitement as she held up a drawing she had carefully hidden behind her back. It was a new picture of the three of them, holding hands under a bright sun, with the words, "Our family," scrawled in her careful handwriting at the top. "This is us," she said proudly, showing it to the guests before turning to Nate and Celine. "And I want to say thank you for making our family whole." The crowd let out a collective sigh of admiration, and Celine bent down to hug her daughter tightly. Nate crouched beside them, wrapping his arms around them both as the officiant declared them husband and wife. The kiss that followed was not just a seal of their love, but a promise of the life they would continue to build together. As the ceremony concluded and the guests erupted into cheers, Nate, Celine, and Aria walked back down the aisle hand in hand, their smiles wide and their hearts full. The future stretched out before them, not as something to fear, but as something to embrace. Together. A lasting legacy. Weeks later, the pavilion stood completed, its mosaic wall a vibrant testament to the community's efforts. At its center was Aria's son, a bright and shining beacon of hope and renewal. As Nate, Celine, and Aria admired the finished structure during a small family outing, Nate wrapped his arms around them both, his heart full. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice soft but resolute. And for the first time, he knew it to be true. Their story had come full circle, but the life they would share was only just unfolding.